talk programme here on the budget as it was today, and I'm joined by Chris Bennett, Jay Fitzgerald Kelly, and Douglas Sadler, a guest who came in from Desmond Tax, a registered tax consultant. And thanks a million for coming in.
Thank you.
You've obviously seen the budget. Was there any big surprises there for you?
Not a huge amount of surprises. It was a couple of hours ago, so we're just still digesting everything that's going on. It's fairly clear to see, where the government are collecting their funds from, and it's reasonably obvious where the cuts are coming from. A lot of it seemed to have been leaked in advance. One or two surprises.
To suit them, leaked in advance to suit them.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Obviously, but I mean, we're running. We have a 13 billion euro deficit at the moment.
Yeah, I'm not aware of the deficit, but there's clearly somebody trying to address it here anyway in this budget.
Yeah. And I mean, they were knocking through, they needed to collect 3.5 billion out of this budget.
Yeah.
But the one thing I suppose that you'd see, that I looked, from what I saw of it, is the amount of fixed items that are hit, like children's benefit, property taxes, like that have nothing at all to do with incomes.
Yeah. Well, I suppose there's a feeling that some income taxes are at their highest point. I mean, the estimates for November were down a couple of 100 million. So the feeling is you've got to kind of attack other areas, because income tax, the more it's being taxed, the less that's actually coming in. So they are moving and have been advised by, I think, the Troika to tax other fixed areas which are more reliable and not, they don't fluctuate as much as income tax. We were badly hit, during the boom. We pretty much depended on CGT, that's capital gains tax, stamp duty, and then suddenly when those transactions weren't taking place, we had a massive deficit. So we're trying to get back really to the fixed type of taxes that are more reliable. Yeah.
And in your opinion, is that the right thing to do?
Well, I'd say certainly from projecting income, if you were the government looking at a business, it's much easier to, if you have a property tax which has been introduced and is supposed to raise 500 million next year, properties don't change very much, so it's a very reliable yearly type of tax to forecast, and like any business, the government needs to be able to see, when funds are coming in and basically forecast their spending accordingly.
But how do you look at it? And I know there's a 0.25% on properties over $1 million and whatever, which is fine, but I mean the gap between 0.018 and it's not significant. Like if you look at the likes of Michael O'Leary, collecting children's benefit, which he doesn't want, and has said so, and then the extra tax that he's paying on his house, which is obviously far larger than most. Yeah. But it's still very. It's not very equal, is it?
Yeah, it certainly doesn't. Like there was all this talk of a mansions tax, and the differential between houses over $1 million and under $1 million. It's not that great, as you say. It's only, I think it's about 0.25. Yeah. So it's not a major disincentive for people to go out and buy mansions. That's certainly the case.
Sure. Yeah. Jay, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, definitely. You were saying about the tax take and the tax revenue, and it seems to me that the first thing that Michael Noonan said when he was delivering the budget speech was that the primary objective was to meet the Troika targets. He pretty much said that. Now, they've kept they haven't changed the tax credits, the tax rates, the tax bands or anything like that. Yeah. And as you said, they're going for the easily projected kind of incomes. But the flip side to that is that it's not going to stimulate the economy, that it's not going to put any money out there for, let's say, the small and medium-sized enterprises who they're hoping are, who the enterprises basically that need the consumers here in the country. How do you see that working out for them? And do you think that might have been a good idea in terms of stimulating the economy to actually lower the tax rate? If they were going to go with the solid investment of taking money from child benefit, from everything else, all the stable ones.
Yeah, they had, and he did refer to this 10-point plan for small to medium enterprises. I looked through it and I felt it was reasonably weak. I mean, some of the measures were fairly basic. Most of the incentives to small to medium enterprises are in the likes of companies. So there's great incentives for like startup companies, there's great incentives for companies carrying out research. But when you look at the employees that are actually working in those companies, there's very little to actually incentivize those employees. And the more you earn, you know, again, the greater you're getting taxed. So I don't know, is it really progressing, you know, high level people to become entrepreneurial? It's certainly targeting certain areas, and there's a lot of merit in that. But I don't know, is it strong enough there?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that I think, you know, they put out all this this information, these figures saying that all this was going to be done for the small, medium-sized enterprises, all these different like little breaks here and there, but whether or not it can actually filter through, and it's a very hard thing to predict as well, especially when we know that the economy, it's not exactly growing at a phenomenal rate or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I think that some of the reliefs are quite good for the actual enterprise starting up, but and certain areas you'll see in the budget measures that aircraft leasing and certain type of niche areas are being targeted, and they're trying to look at those areas and say, okay, what makes us the top country in the world for aircraft leasing? And that, for example, is a very big employer in Ireland. And so, you know, there is, we've a limited budget there to work with. I mean, I think 1/3 of the 3 billion that you mentioned earlier must come from tax increases. So there's not a huge amount to go around. They're focusing in on the company itself rather than the individuals. But the individuals, as you see, you can see from the figures there, they're getting hit. You know, most just normal individuals are getting hit fairly significantly. Like one of the surprises that I saw in the budget was the taxation of maternity benefit, which was previously not taxed. So it's kind of hitting young families. Alarmingly, the amount that they're hoping to raise from that is 40 million, which shows the difference there, and it's one of the biggest savings in the actual budget measure.
Yeah, is it?
So I mean, there's some huge ones such as PRSI, but you know, for such a kind of, you'd think, a niche area, there's a very, very big saving there.
Sum of money.
So that's coming directly from, say, young families, which, you know, is pretty harsh.
How much is maternity leave in general? Do you know?
I don't
Do you
know. I think it's something like 1,000 a month. But what they're saying is effectively that that used to be completely tax-free. So if you receive that payment,
and your
you
husband's
don't have to pay
working.
any tax. Yeah. So it was a little bit of a break for the family, and you know, it really hits the spouse. If the spouse who is going out on maternity leave, they're kind of almost disincentivized to go back into work because they're going to get taxed even more on the maternity leave. So
Right.
like
What was interesting today was that we were watching the budget, and Chris is from the UK, and it's his first time seeing an Irish budget.
Yeah.
And he was comparing the UK situation to the Irish situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the things that really came out to me, because obviously the property tax has been something that's talked about for weeks and weeks and weeks. There have been sort of people protesting against it, that kind of thing. What was interesting for me is why, I suppose, Ireland hasn't gone down the route of something like the council tax, which we have in the UK, which in itself is means tested in terms of the ability to pay the tax itself. There are tax credits, exemptions, that kind of thing. But also the fact of the matter with that is that it's very centralised. So you've got waste comes under that, you've got road maintenance, all of those little bits and pieces that in Ireland you have to pay to various other companies and things like that in all small increments. But within that, it's then centralised in, it's means tested. Why not go down that route instead of the sort of the property tax that's come out today, which to me seems a lot less fair as a system than what we have over in the UK?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would wholeheartedly agree with you, because I mean, everybody here is paying, say, a TV license, so they have 160 odd euro for that. Then they get their household charge, then they get all these different
And
charges.
a waste charge of 200 or 300 euros in a bin.
Exactly, and you're like every single week there's some extra charge which are more or less going to the same people coming in, so it's a much better system, and probably people are just going to end up going, look, I'm sick and tired of paying all these charges, will you just ever just give me one charge?
Yeah, exactly. I
And
mean,
that will happen, I
certainly
would
for
say.
centralised administration costs, etc. You'd be saving on your admin
Yeah.
in one go, in one fell swoop.
Yeah, it is. I mean, certainly I've been getting letters where, you know, say the property or the household charge you're getting 2 letters. You might have paid it, and you're getting a letter saying, have you paid it, because it's linking in with one of the other, the septic tank charge or something like that. And, you know, so you're getting all these letters, and there's all these people writing to you, and it's not linked together. And I feel like, say, for TV license, which RTE, I presume, get, I mean, that's really the same thing as another one of these charges. That should really be in there with all those.
With all the rest. And
Yeah.
the
Just
water
combine them
charge
all
coming.
together, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what you guys feel about the TV license charge, but
I think it's fantastic because it keeps an organisation above in Dublin completely uncompetitive, that don't have to make a living from what they're from their advertising, and it keeps them nice and sleepy, and it suits us fine.
How do you really feel, Barry? Seriously, how do you really feel about it?
Bastards.
Something I'm just curious about as well is, let's say, you mentioned about the aircraft leasing, and that's something that I hadn't heard too much about or thought about too much, but it's put into my head the whole export sector as well.
yeah.
And I know that there was mention of the hauliers, and that Noonan was trying to say that, you know, all these different breaks for hauliers, you know, in terms of like the cost of diesel and so forth.
Yeah,
But also that links in with the 12.5% corporation tax,
yeah,
which is something very much targeted at the multinationals.
yeah.
How important do you reckon they are in terms of our economic recovery, considering as well that so much of their profits are repatriated? So maybe I would say, or I'm reckoning anyway, that the real gain is just in terms of employment and the multipliers out of employment.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'd agree with you there. But I mean, they are really a huge lifeblood, in my view, to the economy. I'm not an economist, but if you think of the income taxes and VAT and all of those sort of indirect taxes that the employees, very high-paid employees, are contributing into the system, you know, you'd have to think that their benefit. I mean, even if we got no corporation tax from them, you know, presumably they would be you know, worthwhile anyway because of the amount of people they're employing. If you look at
The interesting thing about that, though, and I've come up with this before, is that you say that, but the people that are working in there, they're good people. They're top-level people in a lot of these companies.
That's true. Yeah.
And they would be working anyway. If they weren't working for Google, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I've heard of that concept, and I think it happened in Digital in Galway years ago, where, you know, that plant shut down, and then a lot of, you know, startups came out of that.
And the money that those startups made stayed in the country as opposed to the next, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's just
they're renting our brains.
It's a very difficult, you know, it's difficult to work
Sure.
out whether it's better or worse, but I suppose it's something an economist could probably give you a better answer.
Yeah.
I suppose one thing that interested me, again, coming from a UK perspective on this, we were talking earlier about sort of finding the savings within the budget and having to make tax cuts, having to find this money from somewhere. And one thing that I suppose Barry and myself were discussing was looking at, there was a proposal before this in the leaked information that actually never did come up in the budget itself, which was looking at sort of the payment of sick pay for people, which is obviously a huge problem in terms of how much of a cost in real terms it is, and obviously how much of a cost it is for loss of production and all of that kind of thing. What interested me was the fact that the government over in this country essentially pays for people to be off sick, whether directly through the illness benefit or whether the illness benefit is then put back into the company. But essentially that the government is paying for the people to be off sick, which isn't obviously the case back in the UK, where the burden is on the companies themselves. Now, for me, looking at a budget like this, if you want to make a saving, that would be a significant place to do so.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there. I think that this came out a couple of months back, and it was heavily resisted politically, and, you know, often politics tends to kind of outweigh, you know, logic in some respects.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there was, and I'd say that the big issue that you may not have seen was there's a huge reluctance to tackle what they call the grey vote. You know, so the highest number of voters are older people, because they'll actually go out and put their vote in. But they got, you know, some of the higher earning pensioners got a little bit, that some of the tax bans were imposed on them in this budget, and that was probably the first dipping of the toe into kind of politically sensitive area. But, you know, there's a kind of a between politics and economics, there's a bit of a mix there in coming up with the budget, and logically,
Logic goes out the window.
Goes out the window.
yeah, I mean
Yeah.
they just can't politically attack the older vote, and that's why you don't see pensions going down.
But what I can't understand, you know, you see this, like, we've got to get 3.5 billion, we've got to get an awful lot more, we're 13 billion over, so we're 3.5 billion this year. But wouldn't you think, like, the normal people of the country would love to be in a position, most of them, where they would be happy to pay their tax,
Yeah.
knowing that the system was fair and they were getting good service for their tax.
Yeah.
Now, I can't ever remember that being the case. I mean, they were blowing billions and billions of euros, e-voting systems, all, you know,
Yeah.
tribunals, billions going left, right and centre all over the place. 150 million euros to decide where to put a hospital. You know,
Yeah.
this kind of, like, and people just get so mad that they, and you also feel like the people collecting the tax as well. You know, they must be demoralised. You're going out there to collecting tax, and then at the exact same time, you're putting it into a box, and the people are just throwing it away.
Yeah, I think that it definitely disincentivises people when they see the more waste they see, you know, the more, you know, they're likely to move into the black economy and just basically not declare any income. And,
Yeah.
you know, that as the taxes get higher and as they see money being wasted, then that's a real problem that the black economy, you know, nobody gets anything out of that really.
Yeah.
So.
I suppose if I may, just to jump back to the point, you were talking about the grey vote there, which I think is a really interesting point to make. Looking at this budget itself, to me it seems a budget sort of essentially anti the grey vote as such. You've got the solid fuel costs are going up, the telephone allowance is going down, you've got the property tax, prescription charges are going to increase, GP-only cards for the over 70s on a certain amount of money, A&E charges are going up. All of this is going to hit the grey demographic, the elderly people out there. And at the same time, you've got this £60,000 per annum on a pension, which is now going to receive no tax relief. But the thing that I suppose that the government hasn't really thought of on this is that a lot of that money now in the situation could essentially be going out to children or grandchildren to help them out with you know, arrears on their mortgages, things like that.
Yeah.
So for me, looking at this budget, talking about the grey vote, this is a hugely anti sort of elderly budget.
Yeah, well, I think that in your summary there, I mean, I'd say Michael Noonan is glad that you weren't up there presenting it, because if everything was put in the order that you put it, you've actually, you know, analysed really they are getting hit indirectly by some of those things like property taxes, because they have the most valuable properties, and they have got hit in the non-core pensions, such as fuel allowances and things like that.
It's a huge shame for these people who have essentially built the economy in the first place off the back, you know, off the backs of their hard labour, and now you're saying, well, you know what, we're going to screw you.
And not only that, then they have to give half their income in a lot of cases to their children who
Absolutely.
are up to the rise in debt.
Yeah, well, that is the case. But I suppose if you don't take it from them, you know, you've got to take it from everybody else, and the worker is getting hit as well very heavily in the budget, particularly by increases in PRSI, and there was some ceilings for that, and you know, you can see there's something like 250 million expected to be raised by just simply removing a kind of an exemption limit for PRSI, so it's hitting everybody really.
Another thing that actually cropped up that was quite interesting is that, and it was put across very much as a thing to boost up local government and sort of grassroots democracy and, you know, power to the people. Local authorities will be able to charge around the rates that they can go up or down, either like up 15% or down 15%. Is that a very clever way of getting a little bit more money out, like another 15%, or do you think it's more likely to promote efficiency?
I think it's back to one of the points that Tom was raising there about accountability, and it's trying to link that if we're paying a certain household charge, that we may look at our local councillor and go, you know, I'm not happy that you guys are charging 15% more than the average, because the service you're doing is absolutely appalling. You've got way too many guys employed, and
You're inefficient.
you know, so maybe I think it's more that rather than a kind of a sly way of just
Getting an
increasing
extra,
it.
Do you not think, I
extra
suppose,
fee.
it might be sort of a passing of the political buck, saying, well, we're the government, we've given the option to the local authorities, and now, you know, vent your spleen on them, kind of thing.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see which local authority jumps first and goes up or goes down.
Hopefully not Cork.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it'll be interesting to see, does anyone go down?
Yeah, it will actually, and probably the more progressive ones will go down, and
Which
you
I
know,
suppose would almost undermine the whole idea of it in the first place if they do go down the 15% to have that rate across the board. You know.
Well, I suppose the question then would be, how is it they were able to go down 50%? Is it that, they actually were able to put through greater efficiencies?
yeah,
Is that
exactly.
the-
And I think, we're only teasing it out here because it's 2 or 3 hours old, but I think certainly if that is how it will end up panning out, that would be very good
Yeah.
because there will be pressure on local authorities, and presumably when they're canvassing around, they'll be saying, well, we're going to reduce it by 2% this year or something like that. But it's a good system to move the local authorities, I think, away from things like raising their money through, planning contributions, which is like open to conflict of interests and
To say the least,
so it's probably good that they have a source of funding. Like that.
Douglas, what if you had that in front of you? Where would you like to see adjustments made yourself?
It is a very, very difficult task. I mean, if you look at, some of the things like alcohol, tobacco and all of those, I mean, they probably, you have to say, they go up every year and, you just have to make those cuts. But at the end of the day, they're only really saving you, say, okay, alcohol is saving you 180 million apparently, but tobacco is only saving 20 million. So you still have another 800 million to go. And, Chris has said, look, you're hitting the elderly folk pretty hard, and then you're also hitting the worker very hard. So, I mean, I don't see a lot of wriggle room. I haven't looked at it, enough to kind of say, look, this is where I would shave the money. So I'm not really that well able to answer
but
the
at the
question,
end of the day, though, you still have to take 3.5 billion out of a 13 billion deficit in a day somehow.
Yeah, and I think I was reading an article that the agreement supposedly between Labour, who is always in favour of upping taxes and not hitting spending as much, is that the Labour and Fine Gael agreed when they came in that they would effectively have 2/3 expenditure, 1/3 tax. So, I mean, they have to work in that 1/3 must go in taxes, and that's just the way politically, again, that it seems to have to work,
Regardless of logic.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the way. I mean, that's just life. These are the people we voted for, and we just have to.
Do you think people will pay this property tax?
I think they'll have to, because I mean, I work in the area of taxes, obviously, and if you don't pay, and if you're caught, there's huge penalties and interests. So, if people don't, and if they have a good collection mechanism, people are kind of fooling themselves in some ways. Because eventually it'll build up to, say, a couple of €1,000, and then it'll be in the interest of revenue to just come and take proceedings.
And I suppose in Spain we have I've lived in Spain for 6 years.
Okay,
But if you sell a property, any tax bill that's with it is deducted.
Yes, I think they have that in Ireland now as well. That if it's a charge on your property.
Yeah.
And there was some, I didn't really analyse in detail, but there's some mechanism of deferring your taxes by, until you sell it, but I'm not sure exactly the ins and outs of that.
Actually, one question that I have as well is just, and this is a bit broader, but Douglas, would you say that between all the cutbacks that have had to be made, all the savings that have had to be made, and the influence of the Troika in general, is this going to make this country run more efficiently in the long run? Is it going to change the culture of the country enough for it to be maybe more in line with the Northern European countries that would generally be quite efficient?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like the fact that we're having to make all these cuts, but I mean, we are where we are, and I think that if the Troika weren't there, I suppose I wouldn't really have the confidence that politicians are able to make these type of decisions, and it's great for politicians.
System,
It's great for politicians to be able to blame the Troika, and actually, they're applying logic to where they're saying you must cut here and you must do this and that, and it's probably the first time that there's been less politics and more kind of economic logic. I mean, the IMF have gone into loads of countries, and there's a formula for doing it. So I would have a lot more confidence in, from a purely financial perspective.
So we should nearly say we should nearly be grateful for the Fourth Reich in that case.
I don't know. I won't say that on in the interview, but I suppose it's the IMF aren't necessarily the. They're not necessarily Germany or the EU or anything like that, but they're it's probably better that they're looking at it from a cold, hard, logical perspective rather than what we've been used to, which hasn't been good.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Great. I suppose I've got a final question along the lines here. What interested me as well, going back to the housing sort of situation, and obviously what essentially got you into the mess in the first place, was the tax breaks and the exemptions that were put through on the budget for people buying new or unoccupied houses. But I'm thinking to myself, who are these people? If you're hitting people in their pockets in real terms, you've got people who can't afford their mortgages as is. Who are actually going to be these people? So is this just a tax break and exemption as a political soundbite, a bit of a throwaway? Because to me, I can't see the people here who are actually going to benefit from this in any way.
Well, I actually think that the people are the young people that are going to try and buy houses, because the people who are really struggling are the people who bought houses when they were much higher.
I suppose though, if you're gonna go down that route and say it's the young people buying the houses, are these people who let's say they're middle income earners, they're 25,000 euros, something along those lines. If they do buy the house, they're going to enter into the mortgage. They're then going to have to factor in the property tax. They're then going to factor in all the other taxes that have come out in the budget. I mean, is it actually going to be feasible for young people to get onto the property ladder again?
I think it is, because effectively a point will come, and it always comes, where rent is more expensive than buying a property, and just it depends on the area you're in. But I don't know what it is in Cork, but that price point, I'm sure in some areas in Cork has already hit. Now I was kind of surprised to see mention of property regeneration areas and things like that, and I was kind of like holding my head going, are we starting again with our Section 23s and that? But a lot of the detail, like a lot of the actual detail, say as a tax practitioner, there's a thing called a finance bill coming out in say 3 months, and effectively that will contain like a lot of the nitty gritty of all of these reliefs, more of the kind of things that may hit high income earners. So you mightn't have seen
the whole lot yet.
The whole lot yet, and a lot of people, like the people that the very wealthy, maybe hit a bit more in the finance bill than we're seeing in the budget, which is really just headline rates and
so
figures.
I suppose, like, sort of in your professional opinion, shall we say, would you actually say that some parts of this budget are, as it was called by the people announcing it, progressive?
Yes, I would. Now, a major part of the savings there is, say, PRSI, and it's not necessarily progressive, because I think Jay mentioned earlier that they're not changing the 20% rate and the 41%, but actually what they're doing is they're bringing in these universal social charge and PRSI, which actually there's no kind of exemption levels for these, so everybody is paying. So if they increase that by 1%, it's 1% of your total income. So that's not progressive. What is progressive is that the people on higher incomes pay more, and we've had a shift in the last few years towards kind of being less progressive, but I think that's had to be the case because like a massive proportion of the country weren't paying any tax.
Going in the right direction.
Yeah.
Slowly but surely.
And tell me, the one thing there, the people on the labour, I think it's costing something in around, just on the unemployment assistance, 4 or 5 billion a year. Do you think it'd be progressive to ask them to go and where we're with modern technology? This is probably no outside your field, but like using modern technology, to ask them to study something online. In other words, that they become trained to the system of the way the country is going, and it's easier to get them back into work. Because to me, if you've 400,000 people unemployed, costing 4 or 5 billion a year, if you swing them back into employment, the net result is probably 10, 12, 15 billion. That's where the room is, as I see it.
Absolutely. I mean, if the labour market improves, the savings would be
the labour
huge.
market would improve if the workforce were trained to where the labour market needs to be now.
Yeah, and I suppose, in theory that should work if these courses are good enough to make somebody want to employ somebody that has done one of the courses. But, so some of the courses aren't good enough and they're very expensive.
There's a lot of good online courses now,
Okay, yeah.
There are a lot of them coming out now, from what I see. But I think this budget is completely lacking imagination.
It certainly is, yeah.
There's no imagination, there's no proper architecture to it when you're just putting property taxes and the like straight across all people regardless of income, child benefit the same way. no imagination.
There is certainly no imagination, and as I mentioned earlier, the 10-point plan for the SMEs was really, really weak. You know, some of those things were like very minor reliefs for some, you know, farming type relief that maybe would save $1 million or would cost $1 million. You know, and they put that in as one of their supposedly great 10 plans. So it only affects a very, very small. It may be a very good relief, but it doesn't affect most business. So, you know, I think very little imagination was brought into that SME type sector. Despite the fact he spent a lot of the speech talking about it.
Yeah, I noticed that too. That it seemed disproportionate, almost like you know, it was the magic bullet.
Isn't it the situation though? When you go back over the last 30 years, the type of politicians, the party politics is the big problem, I think. Whether it is Fine Gael and Labour, Fianna Fáil, it doesn't matter. The way people are elected, the system that's there, and you have the likes of James Riley there, you know, at the last minute popping on to
Whatever it was.
their clinics,
healthcare centres.
healthcare centres at the last minute, and then the whole party backs and they all told the party line. I mean, like, how can you, as you said, logic is gone out the window when you're down to that.
Yeah, well, I won't pretend to be an expert on that, but you
No,
know,
but
it
I
is
mean,
very
I'm just-
disappointing when you see that kind of, you know, what we thought was gone. You know, giving the appearance of coming back into the system again.
And everyone is standing behind them because of party politics.
Yep.
Douglas, thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Douglas.
having me.
Great stuff. Thank you.
And
Thanks, Chris.
we're going to finish off our budget programme with a clip of the opinions of the people of Cork that were taken on the streets today by Breed and Martin. Thanks very much for watching.
Thanks for watching.
Oh, there will be very sharp cuts to the poor people, and they can't live. They can't live already.
It always affects the poorest first. They always feel the brunt of things earliest.
I think we should be looking for a bigger deal in Europe and hopefully getting a better deal in Europe. And things don't seem to be progressing there. And that's what's annoying people, I think, the fact that we're being fudges on the European deal.
I pays my children's allowance pays my mortgage.
Does it?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you?
So every time they take money off me, I have to come up with more money on the dole.
I think they will look at some of the social welfare aspects for older people, you know, like travel and maybe those things, take something of that. But I think this, the household charge should be dropped altogether.
Should be taken off the people that have the money.
Okay.
You know, the high class people have loads of money, like, you know.
So you'd push it on the big pensions, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Bankers especially. They're the ones that done us.
They should reduce their own bloody pensions and allowances and stop hurting us.
Well, I suppose there's never such thing as a fair budget, is there?
I think they should rethink the time that they bring out budgets. It's 3 weeks to Christmas. It's kind of mean.
It's going to be overkill.
Do you think overkill?
Overkill.
Okay. What do you think they're going to tackle? Or tax even?
The family life. The Irish family life are going to be destroyed. And the Irish government don't care because they are subject to the European Union, and the European Union is subject to the one world government. Therefore, Ireland is in trouble. The only good thing that we can hope for is that Irish people will have the coupon to get out of the European Union and go back to the same way that it was 30 years ago to save Ireland.